All right. Hi, welcome. This is the 2025 Astrological Forecast for the year, and I'm Sarah Borland, and we're just going to go ahead and jump into it and get started. So let me just go ahead and share my presentation, and we'll go ahead and talk about the astrological signatures for 2025. So, what are the signatures that are occurring this year? Now, usually what I like to do is I'll just go ahead and give you a quick look at this. I always like to start with the cultural cues. So it's more than just the historical references, but then also what can we see in other aspects of culture that are giving us the clues. So some of it might be current events, some of it might be like color, numerology, and so on. We'll look at the big themes ahead for the year, key dates, and then final thoughts. And this, of course, is one of my favorite quotes by Henry David Thoreau, which is the universe is wider than our views of it. Just a quick introduction for those of you who don't know me. My name is Sarah Borland. I'm an astrologer with a little bit over 25 years experience. I'm certified with the Organization for Professional Astrologers. I'm also a member of the Tucson Astrologers Guild. When I started, people that started at the same time I did were all studying evolutionary astrology. So that's my basis. And I've also studied traditional astrology as well as I'm a certified horary practitioner. So my big passion is writing. I've written a few magazines. I'm a contributing author. And now currently I'm working on a book that the title of it is, or the working title, I know it's already not going to be this title, but it's Unlock Your Shadow, Discover the Keys to Emotional Security. And it really is, if I were to put it into a quick caveat in terms of what it's about, it really is all of the territories of the moon. So everything that's the archetypal territory, like motherhood, ancestry, your emotional nature, what it means to be feminine, the divine feminine, and so on. This is all what I'm working on right now. So I'm also a speaker. I'm a podcast guest. So if you're listening to this and are interested in having me be a podcast speaker, I can talk really, please go ahead and reach out. I was in the Enlightenment Entrepreneur Summit last March, and I'm doing a talk for TAG in March of this year, and then something in the spring for OPA. As well as I spoke at the iAstrologer conference in May of 2022. So I love doing talks and giving speeches. So that's really enjoyable. All right. So where have we been and where are we going? And I always start with the colors of the year. And so this gives you a look at the first so many years when I started doing this. Really quick overview. 2020, we were in the beginnings of the pandemic, and it's interesting that the color forecast was blue, which is security. And then down here is looking at the different connections to the chakras. And then 2021, when we had lockdowns and everything was really chaotic, I find it really interesting that they chose two colors that year, and it was yellow for which means happiness, and gray is really about this fortitude and security, or insecurity, really. Purple in 2022, which correlates to sensitivity or even the crown chakra. Red or Viva Magenta in 2023, root chakra, 2024, the sacral chakra, which was I forget the name of that color. And this year, Mocha Mousse. Now, when I was an interior designer, color psychology was a big part of what I did. And I was introduced to the Pantone Institute way back in the early 80s. They're the color forecasters, or they have a color forecaster who does this for the entire world. So, they do a lot of research and looking at cultural cues and fashion shows and so on. But they really are, they're hired by corporate consultants about colors to, paint cars and any sort of marketing efforts. But when we look at this brown, this mocha color is related to the root chakra, which when we correlate that with the astrology, it's not surprising because really the global zeitgeist I'm going to say everything backwards tonight, really has a lot to do with there's so much upheaval in the world. We need a sense of security. So it doesn't surprise me. I'm remembering back to the 70s when I was in middle school, and I'm remembering browns, tans, the deep rusts, a lot of the earth colors. And it was kind of the same thing. Of course, in the mid 70s, we were going through the energy crisis. And again, there was a lot of upheaval in the world. And when that happens, people reach to things that make them feel comfortable and secure. So it's generally not the times when you're going to see the really bright colors. So I find it interesting that we're going back to the root chakra again. Now we're going to move on to numerology, which again is the energy frequency of 2025. Now, when you break 2025 down, it's a 9 year. And for those of you that know numerology, this is an ending. Nines are completions of cycles because after the 9, you start the cycle over again with single digit numbers, or the 10 or a 1. So this is really a transitional year, and it's a transformational year. So again, all of these places that I look, I'm getting similar messages about the energy for the year. If we look at Tarot, the 9 card is a hermit. And again, it's about solitude, reflection, and seeks wisdom. And Lori, I totally understand. I have also felt the need to really pull all of my energy back in because it feels like there's so much chaos out there. I've definitely been feeling the need to kind of just go within and really be the hermit. All right, so we're going to start with the astrology, looking at just an overview, and then we'll go ahead and get into each of the signatures. So for this particular time, before we start, I just want to take a caveat because I know many of the people who are listening, at least live here with us, do not have a background in astrology, aren't astrologers, and some of them just show up when I'm giving a talk, which is super, super sweet. And I so appreciate all of you, and you guys know who you are. But astrology is the study of cycles, and it talks about, I will talk about, as other astrologers do, the energetic signatures that are showing up. It tells a story of potential. And the potential is both positive manifestation as well as a challenge or a negative manifestation. And there's a lot of factors that come to play on which one shows up, and sometimes both show up. So all I can really do is speak to the energy, and especially by looking back at history or looking at what's happening in current events to get a clue or a hint, or use, some of my psychic information, but I can't tell you the specifics. I can't tell you if, something's going to happen in the future because we all have free will and we all have some amount of fate involved. And I'm going to stress this, that we are in a collective. This will come up later in the talk, but it really is about staying focused on what we want to create and manifesting, and how we manifest. The information is really becoming more and more available to us. It's not so much of a mystery. So being conscious co-creators is a huge important piece and responsibility that we have. So the energies are out there, but what we do with them is our responsibility. All right, let's talk about the planets. All right, 2025, huge major shifts. Huge. Like this has never happened before that we know of. 2020, and it's bigger than just a 1 year cycle. This is a cycle that's happening, that started in 2020, and all of these shifts will be done in a couple of years. So we're in this transition time of major outer planets changing signs, which means they're changing archetypal energy, and huge shifts, which we'll get into. So this new archetypes that are introduced into the collective unconscious. Now, because they're outer planets, they actually have a generational shift. Now, we all know the moon, which completes its orbit around the Earth in 1 month. It's fast, it's changeable, it's making stuff happen, but it's quick and it's dirty. I mean, it's like super quick. Pluto is the polar opposite. And of course, it's orbiting the sun. And the Pluto cycle is 248 years. So it is grinding ever so slowly. And so when it elicits change, the change is happening over years. So it's very slow, but if you pay attention to the symbolism, you can see it happening in the news all the time. You can get glimpses of some of the echoes that are happening, and you'll be able to kind of go, "Oh, wait a minute. I do this all the time." It's like, "Oh my God, that's Pluto in action. Oh my gosh, there's Mars." So it's often in reaction to things that are happening. All right, so here we go. 4 major planetary shifts. We have Pluto, which has been doing its dance between Capricorn and Aquarius of the last couple of years. It made its final move into Aquarius on November 19th and will stay there for 20 years. Pluto is about power and control, and it really represents the birth and death cycle. So when Pluto's in the house, it is going to be about transformation. And it's not easy transformation. You have to go along willingly. Otherwise, it can make things very, very difficult. And it moves in a very dynamic way. Now, Neptune is the next planet that's shifting. And Neptune is shifting from Pisces and it is moving into Aries this year. And it's going to be doing a dance between the two signs, the two archetypes over the next year or so. So Neptune is about beautiful inspiration, the things that we can't see yet, having visionary ideas. But on the flip side, it's also about things dissipating and dissolving, the dissolving energy. And it also encompasses deception and illusion. So we have to be careful because we're in a time where we're not seeing things maybe as clearly as we could be. So that's always good. And I think that there's a lot of examples about that we'll see that'll come up later. Saturn is the planet of limitations and boundaries, but it's also about mastery, accomplishment, and reality. So again, it's got a range of energies that can get expressed when it gets activated. And Uranus is about change, breakthrough, disruption, liberation. It's genius. It's literally like a lightning bolt. It was not here, and then all of a sudden it arrives. So it's very unexpected and sudden. I love this quote, which I think really talks about what's happening right now by Anne Baring. What is being born in the collapse and disillusion of the old mythologies, the old belief systems, which have divided instead of uniting humanity, is the recognition that we do not live in a dead, meaningless universe, but instead within a sacred cosmic order. And I feel like this is very much what is happening right now. There's a collapse, there is a dissolving of the old archetypes, the old belief systems. But instead, what is happening at this really critical crisis point right now, because anytime you change signs, you're at a critical point of transformation between one type of energy and the next. And we are seeing a divide. We're seeing a divide in our society, and it's not just our country, it's all around the world. We're seeing this huge division that's causing a lot of stress. All right, so we have disruptive times. All of this year into early 2026, many of these outer planets are moving from 29 degrees, which is the very end of a sign. For example, Neptune, 29 degrees of Pisces, moving into Aries, and then moving back, moving forth. So when it's at this 29 degree, 1 degree time period, it's extra stressful. So, all right, so what are the disruptive times that I'm calling this year? Pluto moved into Aquarius at the end of November. It's about a technology explosion. And that's not new. We don't even know the half of how fast things are moving. AI is just the tip of the iceberg. And we'll get into that soon. Neptune moving into Aries this year is about innovative visions and a new paradigm. Now, Saturn in Aries moves much faster than the rest of these, but it's a big player because it's going to be moving early on into Aries while Neptune is moving into Aries. So they'll be working in concert, or actually they kind of have different energies. So we'll see how that one plays out. But I'm calling this constraints in action because Saturn has a lot to do with having boundaries and limitations. Uranus and Gemini, it's a wake-up call. It's a time for liberation. And Jupiter in Cancer is a growing need for nurturance. Because after all of this chaos, we all need to take our teddy bear and go sit in the corner. All right, so again, where have we been and where are we going? All right, I'm going to start with Pluto. And I've been talking about Pluto since 2020 when I started doing this. Well, personally, I've been talking about it before, but with you guys since then. It's a 248-year cycle. It is symbolic of radical transformation. Well, Aquarius and Pluto. Pluto and Aquarius, radical transformation. It's about the death and rebirth cycle. And how that happens, think of the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? First, there, boy, I'm not necessarily talking about LA, but that certainly came to mind when I said burning things to the ground. But then out of the ashes arises the phoenix, the transformation that occurs, and then rebirth can happen. So with Plutonian themes, it's a signal to transform what's no longer working. And so when we think about this, as an astrologer, I look back and say, well, gosh, to know what's happening now, I need to go back and look at 248 years ago. And I don't want to repeat a lot of what I've said previously, but 248 years ago was the American Revolution, the French Revolution. There was also a Haitian Revolution. And that really correlated to the Pluto and Capricorn time period, and which started in 2008. And it was about just an overview, control, and hierarchy. It was the old way of doing things, very top down. And when I related it to the United States chart, because countries have birth charts too, is we know this is affecting governments, the economy, education, healthcare, any of the major institutions that our government operates within. Because Capricorn is about impersonal determination to achieve. And so Pluto did all of this disruptive work, but it's not like just because it's moving into another sign that its work is done. It still continues, but the major focus, kind of like all the disruption is more or less has happened, or the groundwork has happened, so that the next phase is where we begin to take it into creating something new. Now, Pluto goes into Aquarius, started in November, for the next 20 years. Now, I can't help it. I'm really optimistic. When I look at these planets, I really like to tell you the shiny positives, and that's definitely humanitarianism. Aquarius is about I can't even say the word. I can't even say it. I have y'all muted, so I can't hear you laughing with me. It's about equality. It's about the new ways of doing things. Aquarius is grassroots. Like, it wants everybody equal. It wants to hear everybody and create the best possible form of something it can. But at these early critical degrees, One of the negatives is, and we're already seeing it, that seeing this coming out, is it could be autocratic. We're seeing um, this kind of really powerful top-sided government is beginning to rear its head. We don't know exactly where things are going to go with this, but we're still asking the questions. What's going to happen with our democracy? What's going to happen with our money? Will we go digital? How long will that take? Will it take? What about capitalism? It's likely being kind of massaged into a new kind of way of doing things. Digital education is another one. Certainly after the pandemic, I was really questioning, really were we going to start seeing amazing um, changes in terms of education and how it could be more individualized using more digital technologies. So there's a lot of change, but none of it happens quickly. So we just have to keep our eyes peeled and again, keep what we're looking for as members in the society for what we want and keep advocating for that. So Aquarius is an all for one and one for all kind of energy. Now, when I look around, I started doing the research for this in December, and all of a sudden, boom, I started seeing all of these governments around the world in turmoil. And so these are headlines that I pulled from news articles. Now, November 7th, this one says Germany's normally stable government has collapsed. This one's from BBC, the beginning of December. The French government collapses in a no confidence vote. Here's another article. The day before, December 3rd, South Korean president declares martial law and then backs down. I remember that. And then the 8th of December, Syrian rebels topple Bashar al-Assad regime. So you've got all of this turmoil happening and all this instability in terms of governments around the world. And, there's a lot of divide in our country. So we're seeing a lot of instability globally. And then also, just in terms of what's happening for ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crisis, is we have in Africa, we have the Sudan Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, and Somalia. And then in the Middle East, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, Gaza occupied Palestine territories, which there was some good news about that today on the news this afternoon. And then, of course, Ukraine. So there's a lot of turmoil just around the globe as we are going through this incredible shift of the things that no longer are working for societies. They need to be upended and remade and rebuilt. So we're going to continue talking a little bit about Pluto. We're entering this era, or actually are in this era of radical transformation for about the next 20 years. Not in a bad way. I mean, we've lived through so much. Personally, I never thought the Berlin Wall would come down. I was shocked when it happened. Of course, I was a lot younger, and that probably goes with my age, but we've lived through a lot of radical transformation. And I don't mean to put anybody in fear because we will survive this. We've survived lots of things, but it can be stressful right now. So again, remember at the beginning of these transitions over the next couple of years, these outer planets are moving from one archetypal signature to another, which changes the dynamics that motivate people and that we're seeing in society. But with Pluto themes, we're having a technology explosion. And I've really starting to research it more and more. Of course, we have AI advances that have skyrocketed with heavy demands coming into our awareness for both power and hardware. And of course, AIS advances as well are starting to make headway. But we have needs for hydrogen fusion, expanded nuclear power. I think it was Google. I think I read this a few months ago that Google was actually looking at purchasing, or maybe they already did, 3 Mile Island because they're going to be redoing that power plant because the power is a huge demand right now. Spatial computing, which looks super cool. I actually saw not an advertisement, but a little bit of a blurb on the news showing the new cars. So instead of having the dashboards down below like they are, the dashboards, I don't know if they look like they're part of the the windshield. And so everything is digitized and is projected onto the windshield. So we're not looking down as much. And instead we're looking not through it, but it's right there in a closer field of vision. So that's kind of cool. There's some pretty amazing things that are happening out there. Massive data and visualization tools, of course, it keeps happening. Quantum computing, which I talked about quite a bit last year. You can go back and look at 2024 video to see what I said about it. But the leaps that we're making is just, it's beyond exponential when it comes to quantum computing. It's just mind-blowing. Satellites, 5G and beyond, and of course, robotic advances. When we add Uranus into the equation, because Uranus is moving into Gemini this year, and it will be in Gemini for 7 years, we add communications to the mix. Well, and Uranus is also about sudden and unexpected things because it rules Aquarius. But air and space travel, was listening to a podcast and somebody was talking about that they are building, I think it was in the UK, they're building a personal flying aircraft like airport-ish type situation. So they're already anticipating these. They're not out there for purchase yet, but I have seen online images of these personal flying vehicles, some of the early models that they're coming up with and that they're testing. So the advances are really close. And, it's not quite the Jetsons from like the cartoon characters, but it's pretty cool. I think they're more self-contained. One of the things with in terms of advances and disruptions, because Pluto and Uranus have both of those qualities, and when we think about communications, I'm really feeling it on a visceral level. I think there's a lot of media disruptions that are going to be coming up and questions about that, not only because of the lack of um, transparency and the viability of trusting the messages that come out. I'm really anticipating new social media platforms or new ways to communicate. I'm hoping ones that'll be a little bit more dynamic than what we've seen, the control of the algorithms. I think people are getting really frustrated that the people they want to hear from and see is not necessarily under their control fully, and that there should be a little bit more control from the user's side on that. As well as the fact that with the combination of AI being able to digitally alter, um, I mean, it's scary what I've seen. What looks like somebody talking and what they're saying, it's their voice and it's their face, but it's all been digitally manipulated. And I have to question, is this time period going to push us away from digital technology for information and have us go back to old school meeting in the parking lot? Okay, maybe not that bad, but there has to be a way of being able to know if somebody's telling you something that it's actually them speaking, right? I think there's going to be a level of distrust that's going to be very problematic if the leaders in those industries can't figure out how to do workarounds on it. I think that's going to be a huge problem. Otherwise, we'll all tune out if it's all nonsense. Um, so again, themes of where do we find and get reliable, truthful information? It's a huge issue. And of course, it's the number one responsibility. When I taught history, it was like you can't have a democracy without freedom of the press. You can't have a democracy without people being able to, number one, express what they're thinking and viewing, but then also being able to get reliable, good sourced information. So Uranus and Gemini, because Gemini's two, it's the twins. I would be really cautious in what you hear and what you see. Make sure you're using multiple sources. I would be really careful of duplicitous information or information that has two opposing views. You know, it's going to be up to you to determine where the truth is. But Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury can be a trickster. So we have to really be careful with the amount of information, not the amount, but the type of information we're getting, and if it can be trusted and is reliable. So even more being able to discriminate is going to be highly important. Okay. All right, we are going to transition to, need to peek at my notes. All right. Um, Earth disruptions. And I'm going back a little bit. We're moving this year, next year, out of Uranus and Taurus, but it hasn't happened yet. We're still in the middle of it, but we're moving to Gemini. And I just really liked this background picture because it had the nuclear stuff on the bottom and it had these child's eyes coming through. Um, that it's still a huge issue. And I think especially right now, I really don't have to say too much about it because with the fires ongoing in Los Angeles area, it's really frightening how out of control it has become and how absolutely devastating for the families and loved ones of the families that are in that region, and how many people lost their lives and how many people have lost their homes or are going to be struggling with health wise from just the quality of air, even if you weren't in that area directly. You know, there's a lot of pollutants because of the fires. So I worry about people that were um, or that are affected by that. So this is a slide that I had last year, and I just want to touch on this again. Uranus and Taurus. Uranus moved into Taurus in 2018, and will be leaving Taurus in May 1st of 2026. So we still have another year. It's going to be kind of dipping its toe this year into Gemini, but not for a while. And I want to sit on this one for a bit because I still think we're in the middle of it. Again, just because it's changing signs doesn't mean that these issues fade into the background. They're still incredibly important. They're just taking on a new iteration. Maybe we see it in a different way. Maybe with Gemini, we're going to have all sorts of knowledge and information come up about how to solve these challenges with our Earth. So Taurus represents the Earth, and this is kind of my focus for how I'm looking at this. The positive aspect with Uranus and Taurus has been the fact that we have organic and green solutions. People are waking up to not only for our personal health, but how all the pesticides and chemicals and toxic ingredients that are in our food or on our food or being helping us grow our food has really done us a tremendous amount of damage, and that there are alternatives to this, and there's a lot of focus on alternatives, and it's really come into play during this time period. Of course, it started a little bit before, but it's really taking momentum. There's an evolution in food. Now you have to remember that going back 84 years, which is a full Uranus cycle, is that 84 years ago, we were entering World War II, and we were worried, how are we going to feed our troops? We're going to have to take all the food from our country, ship it overseas so that the troops have food, but there won't be enough for the people who are staying here. So that's when victory gardens came into play. And there was a real big push in the government to look at how we were going to preserve food. So one of the things I remember from a couple of years ago when I researched this was the advent of being able to, like, in those, I remember those from way back when, but those kind of papery containers that held the frozen orange juice concentrate. And I know they there were people who were freezing things before that and canning things before it, come a long line of people who canned things, but being able to do it in an industrialized way. So then what happens is we get all of these great technologies, and then 84 years later, the pendulum has swung too far the other direction, and now we're seeing all the consequences of all of these toxic chemicals in our foods and the long-term effects of it. So now it's time to really, in this next cycle, Uranus and Taurus, starting in 2018, is really opening our eyes and opening consumers' eyes to the effects of this and now making changes. So that's been some good things. And it's a way of healing our planet as well. Now, the challenges with Uranus and Taurus is the environmental instability, which I did so much research on this last year. And it was truthfully, I have to really filter so much out to share with you that I have gathered. But the trajectory around the globe of these superstorms, starting even a little bit before 2018, was just taking off. I think all of us, without knowing astrology, without really reading too much in the news and researching it, you know how things have just gotten so dramatically worse. The superstorms, the floods, the fires, the hurricanes and tornadoes, just this month alone with what's happening in LA has just record-setting fires again. And there was an earthquake on the 6th of January in Tibet and Nepal, fairly large earthquake, 7.1, over 100 people died. There was something just recently in Northern California, another earthquake. So it's becoming very difficult to look away. And then, of course, the fears of the glacial ice melt and the rising tides. And, we used to live on an island, and my daughter still does. I was always, I was very much excited for her to move out of her beach cabin because I was really nervous about those rising tides. Because on a high king tide during a rainstorm in Seattle in the winter, their front yard became filled with otters, and they literally had water underneath the house a little bit. I mean, there wasn't a lot of space between the rafters and the underside of their house. And I was like, oh my gosh, please. It was very scary for me as a mother. Kind of cool looking because it looked like you're on a houseboat, but not necessarily great to live in. And it was, of course, short-lived, and then the king tide went away in a few hours. It all dissipated, but yikes. It was scary for mom. We had food and supply chain issues because when we talk about Taurus, it's not just the earth, but it's also food. And of course, we remember during the pandemic, we had those horrific supply chain issues and empty grocery store shelves. And here's a fact as I was doing additional research in December for this. Now, this is old news. This came out for last year, but the 2025 hasn't been released yet. But the Global Report on Food Crises, so this is the 2024 information, they were projecting for 2024 that 19% of the world's population, or 8.24 million people, would be food insecure. And I'm really blown away by that statistic. And it really doesn't have anything to do right now. I mean, it's a very complex issue. It's not just about the astrology. It's not just about Uranus being in Taurus. This is a much larger issue, but just to understand how much food insecurity there is, I haven't looked at what it is for our country, but globally, it's really incredibly sad. And I don't know what can be done to improve it. But again, with Uranus moving into Gemini, this is a time of ideas and plans and getting our data and knowledge together to hopefully then move to problem solving. So I'm very hopeful with that. And I just want to talk about one piece today in relation to this. And I'm sure many people, I'm very intrigued by this whole seventh generation principle, and I keep trying to find more and more information about it. So if any of you have information about it, want to send it to me or send me some hyperlinks to read, I would be very interested. And it has more to do with the ancestry and the epigenetics that I'm studying, that I'm researching for my book. But in terms of just our planet, so in 1150, that era, the ancient Iroquois had this philosophy, and they called it seventh generation principle, or in their language, that basically this is what it says. I'm just paraphrasing ever so simply, is that decisions today should lead to a better future for 7 generations down the line. So it was always a focus. Every decision they made, they made it with such depth of vision and really thinking about subsequent generations. And it was about community and sustainability. And absolutely, I am not speaking out of turn. We all know how absolutely that is a missing piece with our leaderships today. And I think that this is a piece that really needs to be fixed and to brought back into the fray. Now, what's interesting is that Benjamin Franklin was well aware of this and very much respected the Iroquois people. And when he was one of the framers for the US Constitution, and he applied this to the Constitution. So, and I don't know exactly, how that lines up, but that was definitely something that he was taking into effect when they wrote it. Now, for those of you that may not know too much about history, the Constitution is the legalities or the structure, maybe not legalities, but it's the structure of how the government, the responsibilities of the government. Like it's Article 1 is the executive branch, Article 2, I forget if it's the legislation. I think it's the legislative branch, and Article 3 might be the judicial or vice versa. So it's about the three branches of government, and it spells out their responsibilities and boundaries in kind of open-ended language, lawyer language. So when it was instituted, and Pluto and Aquarius is 200, and we're getting close to the 250-year cycle from the beginning of the Constitution, the ratification of the Constitution. So it's interesting that this is kind of coming full circle, that we might need to look at this again, and how do we realign how we interpret the Constitution so that it actually goes back to these values, because I think it really is a value system. I lost my train of thought. Okay. So what happened is the people who were still upset about having a tyrannical leader and that caused the Declaration of Independence, right? They were like, okay, but this is all about the government, but what about the rights of the people? And that's when the Bill of Rights came out. So the Bill of Rights are about the protections for the people, and the US Constitution is about the framework of government. So there we go, very simply. All right. Now, the next planetary change that we're going to talk about is Neptune and Aries. So Neptune is kind of volleying between Pisces and Aries this year. And, you know, I like a good visual. So I go on to Pixabay and I'm trying to find these great pictures. And I just saw this young warrior woman. And again, my book is very maternal and about women. So that's my lens. So I'm going to seek things that kind of portray what makes me feel like this is the direction things are going in. And plus, being a designer, I love how beautiful that outfit is. So when I started thinking about Neptune and Aries, it really is about a spiritual warrior. It is about, because Aries doesn't fight just to fight. Aries fights to protect. There's an idealistic quality to it, especially with Neptune, right? Neptune is the vision of the ideal. It's been in Pisces, dreaming up the beautiful fantasies about the absolutely perfect vision of whatever that they want to create, right? Whatever you want to create, you've been dreaming all this absolutely idealistic situations. And then when it moves into Aries, Aries says, now take action. Let's put this into form. So it's taking dreams and it's manifesting them. But I tell you, I had kind of a personal aha. And that is when I changed the language of spiritual warriors. And I said, well, Neptune isn't just about spirituality. It's also, well, yes, it's about spirituality, but Aries is also about leadership. It's about being the one people are looking to. And then all of a sudden, instead of me looking at this through these rosy colored, woo-woo sunglasses, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, Neptune and Aries absolutely could be about spiritual leadership. If you change the vision and said, if I were Christian instead of, my amalgamation of my beliefs, astrology, Buddhism, so on. And if I had a Christian lens, it absolutely, spiritual leadership is Neptune and Aries. So it's kind of not surprising that there's this moving forward. But Neptune is also about not seeing things clearly. Neptune is about walking through the fog. Things aren't concrete and linear, they're conceptual, right? So things can get confusing. So again, remember I said the early degrees, the late degrees of a sign and the early degrees of the next sign can be very stressful and can be chaotic. So I don't know, just a theory of mine. And I'm kind of wondering if this is kind of the mud that we're walking through until things start coming up. So yes, spiritual warrior, but what are you a warrior for? What is your ideal vision? What's my ideal vision is going to be very different from Patricia's ideal vision, which will be very different from Faye's ideal vision. So whose vision is it that is being fought for? So just ponder that one. All right, Neptunian themes. It's about a signal to move the vision into action. So Neptune is when it moves through a sign, I put 14-year cycle, but it's 14 years in a sign. And again, Neptune can be either creative visions in its most positive expression, but in its not so positive expression, it can be about illusion and deception. So we always have to kind of make sure we're asking ourselves, are we kidding ourselves or where's the reality? And we're experiencing echo from a previous time period. Last time, now this is interesting. I went back and looked up the 14 years of the events that happened in the Civil War. And because I was a history teacher, like I know all of these events pretty intimately, having taught it for years. When we look back to 1861, this is wild. This doesn't usually happen. But the day that Neptune moved into Aries on April 13th of 1861, it was the day the Civil War started, which usually it doesn't happen in that tight of alignment. Like that's wild to me. And there's some echoes to today. So I'm just going to read off a couple of things and we'll see what comes up. And again, if you're jotting down anything to talk about afterwards, I'd love it. The Civil War, in very simple terms, it was a war about slavery. It was also a war about states' rights. There was a feud between who gets to make the decisions. Is it the federal government who's calling all the shots? Or is it the states' rights where the states get to decide what's best for them and the balance of those powers? So there was earlier than this, there was the first Great Awakening, which I believe, if I remember, happened in the 1830s, so just prior to the Civil War. And there was a second Great Awakening that was happening, and this is a Protestant religious revival that is happening at the same time. And so what happened is in the North, and not just the North, but mainly in the North, we had abolitionists like Abraham Lincoln, and who believed in getting rid of slavery in our country. But now, instead of it just being a good idea or just being an idea that you feel is right, now with the Second Great Awakening, all of these social movements to make society better would actually had this element of I'm doing it because it's God's work. So there was this extra motivation and push to get through hard times. You had the Transcontinental Railroad was being put in at this particular time. And as the railroad was being put in, heading out west, then we had the Homestead Act happening at the same time, which meant if you could get yourself out west, you could get yourself 160 acres. Just got to sign up for it, get out there and get it for free. So, yes, people were going out with pioneer wagons before, but the railroad made it easier. Towns were popping up everywhere. We had the gold rush happening in California, and it really was the wild, wild west. So women were moving in with their families, and women now were taming the West. They were saying, yeah, you guys, we need to be going to church. Our children need to be educated. They need to read, they need to write. So there were lots of movements, not just abolitionism, but there were lots of movements that was taming these new communities that were popping up. So, and there was also women's movements that were happening at the same time. But what happened when the Civil War started is that the women's movements kind of got a little shelved. And then they were like, you know what? What's more important is that we get out there and that we help the men who are being injured and we, do what we can to help the cause and help support their families. So here's some interesting things to keep in mind. So we had in 1866, so during this Neptune and Aries, there was the Civil Rights Act that declared all people born in the United States to be U.S. citizens. I'm just astounded that this theme is coming back up again for discussion. So just keep that in mind. The 14th Amendment came into play in 1868, which is again equal protections under the law. And again, some of these things it's feeling like, and I know they're always being challenged to a certain degree, but it feels like there's a heightened fervor about that. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which I find, and it may or may not be just Neptune and Aries, I didn't look at it this closely, but I was certainly looking at the history and the echoes, is at this particular time, the Transcontinental Railroad was being built. There were what's called the Big Four, and they were not their title, but they were after the fact called robber barons, if you've heard of that. And the Big Four were Crocker, Huntington, Stanford of Stanford University, and Hopkins. And they were four of the wealthiest men who really put a lot of money and really encouraged and lobbied the government to put in the railroad because there was nothing in the West. There was no reason to have the railroad. But they did a lot of deals where they were, if they put the railroad in, they would get money from the, or not, they would get land from the government. And I'm remembering a map, it looked like a patchwork quilt. It was like for every piece of land they got for the railroad, they also got gifted for themselves. So it really was this huge, as I'm remembering, if you know more than I do, please don't get mad at me. Um, but there really was a time period where these four really, really ultra wealthy men used taxes and land grants to really enrich themselves during this time period. So I was like, wow, I'm having all of these echoes from similar themes that are coming about right now, just in my perspective. And that all of this expansion of wealth really was also used when I think of all these seaport towns in terms of really building up these towns. You know, when I go into, for those of you in the Pacific Northwest that know Port Townsend, it was supposed to get the railroad, and it has this amazing architecture all up and down, but it probably has 7,000 people in the town. It didn't make the mark. If it had the railroad, it probably would have been as big as Seattle. But it lost the bid. But at the time, there were a lot of people who built these amazing structures. So, but anyway, there was this huge growth period. And our growth is happening, but it's going to happen in a very different form. It's not necessarily, it's not exactly the same, but I'm finding a bunch of huge echoes from that time period. All right, sorry, history lesson over. I'm going to skip this part. Now, on a high note, I was really inspired the other day. So, I didn't realize it's the 40-year anniversary of the famine relief, USA for Africa. January 28th, 1985. It was Harry Belafonte at some point, couple of months, 6 months earlier, who knows, he was in Ethiopia and was absolutely devastated by what he saw. The amount of famine and starvation just really bothered him. So he came back to LA and he said, we have to do something, and was talking with the right people. And he said, we need to record an album and to do what we can to raise money for the famine relief. So it was his inspiration, and he got Lionel Richie involved and asked Michael Jackson. And they also asked, um, is it Stevie Ray? I can't remember his name. He's right here. Anyway, if you can see my cursor, that guy there. They were three of them were supposed to write the song. And then it went from just a few people singing it. And then they realized that if they could get the American Music Awards was happening on January 28th or 27th, and that everybody was going to be in town. So they got 45, 47 really famous artists together. And it took them from like 10 o'clock at night till 8 o'clock in the morning to record all the tracks to create this song. And if you get a chance, it's very inspiring. I mean, I was around back then, but I was really young. I was really focused on in my college days versus really worrying too much about what was happening in the world. Um, so if you can, this is on Netflix. I would recommend, I really enjoyed watching this documentary. They raised, adjusted for today's dollars, 160 million for famine relief in Ethiopia. And I forgot about it. And it, for me, this was like a little bit of a bittersweet moment because it was not that this was a Pollyannic time period, but it was like, look how beautifully all these people came together to solve a problem. or to make a difference. And it really made me feel the difference that we have today in terms of how much division there is. Um, but anyway, for a bright moment, I think this would be something to strive for, how we can figure out how to come together, and the creative aspect is the most beautiful way to do it. I think people will, if you can put your focus on something else, then you can put all of your worries down and come together to build something great. So I found it really inspiring. All right, we're going to move on to Saturn in Aries, which for me feels like constraints, and it can be also about authority figures. Saturn in Aries could be discipline and action, could be boundaries surrounding what our next steps are. So Aries is like, let's get it done, let's take action. And Saturn says, but we need a plan. We need guideposts. We need discipline. And Saturn in Aries is dipping back and forth between Pisces and Aries for a little while. And then it will move on in 2028. So this is the fastest moving of the planets that we're looking at. It's like a 2.5 year time period it'll spend in this sign. Saturn in Aries is about action that runs into testing or tests. It's about limitations. So it'll take Aries' desire to do it fast, and it will slow the process. Saturn is caution. Aries is impulsive. So just by the nature of these together, it's kind of like there's a conflict there. And it's about using stable structures when taking decisive action. And that's a recipe for success, but it doesn't always come out that way. Now, Jupiter will be conjunct Saturn this year. So as the planets keep moving and doing their thing, Saturn and Jupiter are going to meet a couple of times this year. And when they do, Jupiter is about expansion and Saturn is about constriction. So this was interesting. I actually was watching a video today. For those of you that know Rick Levine, he's like the godfather of astrology. I think everybody knows who he is. And it was interesting because when he was describing this today, he was talking about peristalsis. Or today's when I viewed this little clip he did. And he was talking about it in reference to the esophagus. And it's like that's exactly what happens. There is this expansion and contraction, and that is how things get moved, not just down our esophagus, but then also through our intestines. So there is and it reminds me of what happens in your lungs, the breath, right? It's the expansion and contraction. And what's behind the expansion and contraction? What happens when the two, they have this movement. So I'll be looking at that for Saturn and Aries. All right, last one. And then I'm going to pick up the pace. I need to move faster. When Jupiter moves into Cancer, we're talking about focusing on what's important. And for me, right now where I'm at, this feels so like such a relief. Like it's actually what the doctor ordered for me. Self-care, family, home, nesting, nurturing, because it feels so chaotic out there. I just don't know. I need to stop focusing on what's happening out in the world for a little bit and just fill myself back up. So Jupiter in Cancer, Jupiter moves really quickly. It's in a sign for a year. So it's going to be an increased need for nesting. And Jupiter moves into Cancer in June, early June. So it'll be from June to June. Increased need for nesting, emotional security. I call it focusing on what's important, what's really important. It's an antidote to the burnout from the incessant change. It feels like it's a relief. It's again wanting to nest to nurture, self-care, be with family, be in your home. All right, so those are it was such a big chunk to take on this year. Whew, it's a lot. We will make it, we will survive, but if you're feeling like things are happening so quickly and so much change, it really is. We're just going to have to hang on, hold each other's hands as we walk through this because I'm feeling it, but I've been also really, really steeped in all of this research for the last 6 weeks, 2 months. So, all right, we're going to talk about Mercury retrograde. So, Mercury retrograde, I've got the dates listed on here, and then um, I have not yet. Things have been tough. I'm a little behind, but I do every year a key astrological dates. You could put it in your planner, you could put it on your refrigerator, keep it in your computer. But these are the key dates, the transits that are happening. And then there's just a couple of sentences of focus points that kind of just really distill the essence of it. And I also have the Mercury dates on here as well for those of you that really follow the Mercury retrogrades. So Mercury retrograde, again, Mercury is communication, and it's about pausing and reflecting before you speak. It's about connecting with your inner wisdom. And this just came to me right before we came on today. But I said it felt to me like tempering your lust for fast, mindless action. Because it feels to me like that we're on this treadmill of like do, create, 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 and more, 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 more. And we never stop. And sometimes we just need to stop and reflect and turn around and say, what have I been doing? Is it really what I want? Because sometimes we move faster than probably we should in today's modern era. And sometimes we just get on a treadmill and we don't even realize we've been running on it. And we're like, wait a minute, is this really what I want? So I think the Mercury retrogrades are important for things, really important things. Like if you cannot sign a contract, like a really important contract during a retrograde, it's easy to miscommunicate. Like that's great. But if you have to, you have to. You just try not to. But it's not a do or die. It's just always use your own personal best judgment. But I think this mindless action is kind of an important piece. Um, Saturn is still in Pisces right now. It is until May of this year. We have just a few more months to get real. Keep dreaming, weave those spiritualities into your daily routines. Mysticism and fantasy at this particular time between March of 2023 and May of 2025. It's about reality being infused into those dreams. So it really is about kind of bringing a groundedness to practices, which we've talked about quite a bit this year. All right, notable dates. I'm just going to go this by quarter. Again, remember that we're in this big paradigm shift that's taking several years. We're kind of partway through it, but now it's really ramping up. All right, so this is the first quarter of the year. So I look at the solstice and the equinox times. So what we have here, for the first quarter is, so from like mid-December through end of February, early March, is to reevaluate and contemplate actions. So at the beginning of the year, we have Mars retrograde is what we started the year with, January 1st. Jupiter is also reevaluate beliefs. We have Uranus going retrograde or went retrograde, slow down, reflect on the changes, and then Mercury in the middle of March, which is pause any fast action and think first. Again, those are all the retrogrades. On the first of the year, we had Mars opposed Pluto, which has been just wreaking havoc in my chart. It's been like, whew, I'm very careful when I'm driving right now. So, very volatile energy. Uh, in the 12th, we had the change of nodes, the nodal axis change to North Node Pisces, South Node Virgo, which is an 18-month cycle. And really, this is about balancing the heart and the mind. And I like to call it analysis with intuition. So it really is balancing out those two planes. Like, yes, using your logic, but then also bringing in the intuition just as equally. We're trying to find the sweet spot between those oppositions. On the 30th, Uranus goes direct, where we might start feeling a little bit more change picking up. The 13th is a lunar eclipse in Virgo. And on the 15th, which I find this really interesting, Neptune is in Pisces at 29 degrees. And if we remember back to December, there was craziness in our politics here in the United States about the debt ceiling, and backdoor deals were made and things were pushed off and said, we'll come back to this the middle of March. And so we have the middle of March, Neptune is more active. So I would be looking for, keeping that mindset to potential illusion or deception happening. All right. Second quarter, we have endings and beginnings with the vernal equinox. We have a partial solar eclipse in Aries and dreams moving into action. So this is a really good time to that. It's spring, fresh start. We get into May and we've got Pluto is stationing retrograde. It's going to start moving apparently backwards. It doesn't actually move backwards in the sky. It's just from Earth. It looks, if we could see it without a telescope, well, even with a telescope, it looks like it starts moving backwards, but it's kind of a purge. And then on the 15th, we have again Jupiter square Saturn. So this expansion contraction, which for me, it's tension, but it feels exhausting. I don't know why exhaustion came up for me, but that definitely for me, it might feeling like it's just a bit much with this constant tension. And then on middle of June, Jupiter square Neptune with deceptions and fantasy coming up again. Third quarter, home and health. We're met with the beginning of summer with the summer solstice in June. And then look at this craziness in July. All of the red are retrogrades. We have Neptune is retrograde, Saturn is retrograde, Mercury is retrograde, Chiron station's retrograde, and Uranus is retrograde. What came up for me intuitively was like exposure, like shadow side. I'm exhausted. Again, I can tell the energies, but there is so much happening. You know, all I can do is talk to the energies, talk about the energies that are happening. But certainly when we come to September, we have a total lunar eclipse in Pisces, which is all about compassion. I love Pisces energy. And on the 21st, with a partial solar eclipse in Virgo, we can focus on our health. Not that we shouldn't any other times, but it's another little nod to say what's going on with the health. And then fourth quarter, volatility in the fall. Again, we have another Mars square Pluto. And we have Mars opposite Pluto happening at the beginning of January and into December this last year. But again, coming up in September, end of September, we have Mars square Pluto again, which comes about every 2 years. So it's not uncommon, but it is a mark of things that can occur. And take action, because now we have some of these planets stationing direct again. So Pluto stations direct, starts moving in the forward motion again, Neptune moving forward. So that's all good. And then we end with the winter solstice. So there you have it. I think that's plenty for today. If you guys would like, for those of you that I sent you the link via email, I'll send another email and I'll just include this PDF for you. So if you guys want it, it'll be there. You can just do what you want with it. If you're not subscribed to my newsletter, you can subscribe either on my website or on my Substack. I do send my newsletters out via Substack no more than once a month. I also have a second particular place where I do my new moon and full moon reports every month. And then I'll also do I'm not ready to share things on my book yet, but I will soon. And I'll be placing them. It's just called Sarah Borland Astrology. So that doesn't go out to my newsletter subscribers. So I just am really cautious about bombarding people's email inbox. It's my big pet peeve. I hate how much I get emails, unless it's from the people that I want to hear from. But if you want to, you can go ahead and subscribe to that as well as a secondary thing. Because I also put my poetry on there whenever I create something I want to share with the world. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for showing up today, and I so appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now. Again, if you liked this video, please below click the like, subscribe, and I appreciate your support. Thank you very much.